Welcome everyone who's just joined. We're just waiting for a few more people to be admitted into the room. I think people are trickling in. As you join, if you could put your branch name after your name. If you right click on your name, you'll see an option called rename, and you can rename yourself. If you can put in your branch name, then others will know you're here, and maybe you will be able to see who's in the other branches, maybe in your region or in your nation. And it'll be really nice for us as well to know how many USS branches are represented today. We're just about to start in a couple of minutes when Roddy gives me the go ahead once he's admitted everybody, but we should be getting going soon.
All good to go, Deepa.
Thank you very much, Roddy. So welcome everybody to this USS Pensions Fight Back, organized by the UCU Solidarity Movement. For those of you who haven't been to a Solidarity Movement event before, the UCU Solidarity Movement was started in order to bring together branches that were fighting off attacks from employers, especially during the pandemic, and to give us a space for activists to talk to each other and to offer solidarity and support. And we've been quite active in a number of campaigns, including at the University of East London, at SOAS, at Imperial, at Roehampton, at a lot of different places, and we've had contributors from various branches. And before we start, I want to say how grateful I am to those who take part every week in the UCU Solidarity Movement organizing meetings, which take place on a Wednesday, which you are welcome to join, and whose work has kept us going through the pandemic, really, and allowed us to speak to each other. Today's event is the USS Pensions Fight Back. As many of you know, USS is a circa £80 billion pension fund. It is now 80 billion. At the last valuation, it was about 64.5 billion, sorry, 66.5 billion. And as the scheme has grown, you would expect that our benefits would improve, and we would be able to include more casualized people, people who are already at the sharp end of a very poor salary, into the scope of the scheme. In fact, as the scheme has grown and as it has been more successful, and as people like Bill Galvin, the CEO, have made bigger and bigger bonuses and bigger wages, our scheme members' rights have constantly been eroded. And this has happened as part of a very planned trajectory, initially by employers who firstly underpaid into the scheme, and then, or rather took what they call the contributions break. And then more recently, through efforts to move us to a DC pension, which we very strongly resisted at UCU, and more recently through efforts, as our contributors will discuss today, to erode the scheme again. The structure of the session is that we will have two halves to this session. We are expecting to have the speakers in the first session, who are Vicky Blake, Sam Marsh, Neil Davies, and Marion Hersh, speaking for 5 minutes each. We don't expect this to be a rally. We want to hear from different branches and from those of you who have expertise. So you will have a chance to contribute too. Then we will take a break at about 12:25, 12:30. And after the break, we will resume with the second session, which is about, so the first session will set the scene, and the second session will be about how we organize the fight back. We've got a huge number of people in the room. For those of you who've just joined, we have about 400 registrations, and people are still trickling in. Amongst the registrations is a journalist who is aware that, whom we are very glad to invite here, because the person is a specialist in pensions, but also who is aware that none of the contributions made can be quoted without prior permission. So just to make you aware that that's the case. I also wanted to let you know that you will notice as you came into the room that the meeting is being recorded. Only the platform speakers will be recorded, and your individual contributions will not be. Where platform speakers are recorded, they will be asked permission, etc. The Solidarity Movement is a kind of broad brush, so there is a diversity of perspectives, and that gives us a little bit of depth and clarity around what the different voices are saying around the union. So don't feel the need to self-censor if you have a slightly different perspective from that of the people on the panel. On that note, I'm now going to stop with the preliminary comments and invite our first speaker, somebody who has done a lot as a grassroots activist and as a leader within our union, Vicky Blake, UCU's president. Vicky's from Leeds, and Vicky's done a lot on the anti-casualization front. So we're very grateful that she's made the time, despite having quite a tricky schedule at the moment, to join us. Over to you, Vicky. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deepa. And actually, I want to start by thanking everyone for coming to this meeting, because this is a really good sign of how important the issue is. And I feel always encouraged when we have a meeting like this and there are lots of people in attendance. And I also want to give particular thanks to all of the members of the superannuation working group who are tirelessly working on our behalf to fight for our pension. And I chaired that group last year. I know how much work you're doing, and I know that you're not getting much time released, if any, to do it. So I want that to be a theme of thanks. I'm going to talk in quite general terms about how what is happening is another example of attacks on our members and also our potential members, and attacks on our profession. Others will speak more in detail about the proposals that are swimming around at the moment and about the dangers therein. I will probably touch on a few elements of those, but I want to really concentrate on a few key themes. One is how important having a decent pension scheme is to us all as individuals and us all collectively as a profession, and indeed to the long-term economy. It really matters. It's really important. It's not just some kind of extra conversation. It is also really important to the sector that we have a decent pension scheme, as it's a benefit that helps to attract and keep people working in the sector, and without which I think more universities than perhaps realise at the moment will struggle to recruit, particularly against the context of no pay award or pay awards that are so sub-inflationary that they amount to a pay cut. I want us to think about the questions of who stands to gain from what is happening at the moment, the proposals that are being made, the patterns that we see in the proposals that come back in slightly different clothing each time. What are the motivations behind what is being put forward? And how do we get our employers to understand in a real way why they need to join with us in protecting the pension scheme for everyone? And in particular, I want to focus on the unfairness, the injustice, and the disgrace that will be if we end up with a substandard two-tier pension scheme where those staff who are most marginalised actually end up also being marginalised to an extra degree in their retirement, should they even be able to afford to retire on the basis of having a worse pension. So as you're going to hear more about today, there are proposals afoot for what essentially boils down to a two-tier scheme. We've been warning about this for some time. There are also proposals for damaging the scheme for everyone. And I think it's really important that we, from the very outset, make sure that everything that we do in campaigning and fighting for our pension is about unifying the profession. It's about remembering that pension is effectively deferred pay and needs to be understood alongside pay and other benefits, and how we campaign on equality and all aspects of equality. And that we're back in the land of what I call disingenuous deficit chat from USS, and also from employers who are having interesting conversations where, you know, we have made progress. We have made progress in our relationships through negotiations with the employers group, but we haven't won the war, and we haven't got to a point where we could in any way relax. And we've been warning that for some time. And I think the details of what we're going to cover today will make that clear, that while we have made progress and that progress was important, and I do think that we need to remember that because it's very easy to become despondent otherwise, we need to make sure that we recognise that we're back in the land of what is essentially a revamped ACAS deal that we rejected back in 2018. We need to do that work of recognition alongside remembering what we achieved. I'm wrapping up, I promise, Deepa. What we achieved in 2018, which is something that we were told we couldn't do. We did save our DB pension scheme. We can save our pension scheme from further detriments, and that is absolutely what we need to do. And we need to understand that that is fundamental to equality and justice in the sector, and not be fooled by the argument that those with less should get worse pensions, and not be fooled or tricked or swamped by jargon. So the note I'm going to end on is we have educated ourselves and our fellow members about pensions before. We need to step up those efforts again, because the rhetoric that's coming at us, complete with paid influencers, apparently from our employers' side, needs to be challenged robustly. And I know we can do it. We just need to stick together. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Vicky. Firstly, it's great that Vicky brought out those points. I think it's very important to recognize that the employers have three main tools. One is propaganda and how to manipulate the narrative, as Vicky said, with paid influencers. Distraction, making us talk about things that don't really matter, but take our attention away from the big picture. And complexity, because a lot of us feel very nervous about talking about pensions, and it's very easy to put us off really understanding what's going on in the scheme. And I'm so glad to see we have over 250 people here today trying to make sure our union and our employers do the right thing by us and our colleagues for the pensions. Our next speaker is someone who's done a great deal of work understanding what's happening behind the scenes of the pensions. He's one of the vice presidents at Sheffield UCU, a national negotiator, a mathematician, and a very valued member of the superannuation working group. It's Sam Marsh. Sam, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I will try and keep to time. So yeah, I've been asked or tasked with talking about what's wrong with the valuation that's driving this whole story. So I'll get onto that shortly. But just because no one's quite mentioned what's at stake here, let me just tell you the headline figures. So USS are conducting a valuation dated as at the 31st of March 2020, right in the heart of the pandemic, which is one of the main things that's wrong with the valuation. I'll come on to that shortly. And as a result, they've come up with contribution rates that they say are necessary to maintain the scheme without any changes. And for context, we were paying 26% in total of salary towards pensions before the dispute of 2018. The numbers that they're talking about now are 42% at the absolute minimum, up to 56% as the maximum that they say might be necessary to continue with the scheme in its current form. Now, obviously, those numbers are off the scale, completely unrealistic, and so the question is, why have they come up with such numbers? What's gone wrong to make them come up with these numbers? So there are two main things that I think are behind this. The first one, as I've already mentioned, is the date of the valuation. So the valuation has to use market data from a specific date, and the date that is being used is the 31st of March 2020. Now, you may well remember what you were doing around that time. It was probably being locked at home in the first lockdown. And I don't know how many of you followed the markets, but at that point, the markets were in absolute turmoil. They were all over the place, things moving up and down, and very rocky. The effect on schemes like USS were pronounced, at least on the short term. So the assets in the scheme fell significantly. All sorts of other market movements and things like gilt yields and stuff did not move favorably to the scheme. And as a result, if you look at that snapshot and try and base a valuation then, you'll get much worse answers than if you did it at any more sensible date, more stable date. Let me show you a graph which was prepared by USS's actuaries Aon. I think you'll have to put me as speaker view to see this well, but the point will probably come across even if it's small. That's the wrong graph. This is the graph I wanted to show. So if you can't see this, don't worry. What it shows is how schemes, a sort of selection of schemes fared between March 2018 on the far left of the graph and now on the far right of the graph, and you'll see a plummet as at a specific date. What's that date? Well, if you follow it up, it's the 31st of March 2020. So this was a date that was very unrepresentative of the general picture. Everything plummeted and has since made up significant ground. And that's true of USS as much as any other scheme. So that's the first thing that's wrong with the valuation. The second thing that's very concerning with the valuation this time is the level of prudence that's being used in coming up with the numbers. Now, prudence is a way for the people running the pension scheme to run things as safely as they deem necessary. So adding layers of caution so that they don't run the risk of messing up the scheme. Now that's all well and good. Caution is perhaps to be applauded, but the extent of the caution this time is quite striking. So let me show you one more graph before I run out of time. So if I show you this graph, this is something from an article I wrote recently. It shows the growth of assets since 1995, 96-ish, in a solid black line, and this is in real terms, so relative to CPI, they've grown and grown. The dot that's somewhere here is the 31st of March 2020, and the assets had fallen from a peak before that crash. Interestingly, they've since soared upwards from 66.5 billion to 80 billion, as Deepa said. Now, what this graph shows is how the reality of what the investments have done compares with the prudent, careful assumptions that USS have made over the years. So all these lines, these dotted lines going off, are forecasts used at successive valuations. First the 2011 valuation, then a 2014 one, then a 2017 one, then a 2018 one. This wedge in the middle is what USS are forecasting now for their investment growth. Now, if you have very low forecast investment growth, rates go through the roof. So I think that's the sort of the best illustration of why the numbers that USS are coming up with are so high. It's because of extremely prudent, careful, cautious, whatever you like to call it, investment forecasts. Now, I'm pretty sure I've run out of time at that point, so I will stop talking and hand you back to Deepa to take us through the rest of the meeting.
Thanks, Sam. Very disciplined. Thank you very much. And thank you for those useful graphs. I noticed a couple of questions in the chat asking for the graph, and Mark Taylor-Batty, our pensions officer at Leeds, has put a link to the graph. I noticed that Donna's asking how we can know a bit more about the paid influencers, and we'll say a little bit more about that in due course. For those of you who've just joined, I notice a few people have just entered the room. Please make sure you put your branch name to the right of your own name so that we know where you're from, and you can network with others in your local region or nation. Our next contributor is Neil Davies. Neil is pensions officer at Bristol. Neil's also the author of a very important letter that gathered signatures from 4,000 USS members, a letter of complaint to USS around the way in which it was engaging with our scheme. And Neil's very kindly going to talk us through the governance crisis at USS and UCU's legal strategy. Neil, over to you.
Okay. Hopefully you can see my slides here. Does that work? Anyone go thumbs up? Yep. Okay, so the USS governance crisis and our legal strategy. I just wanted to emphasize what's at stake, just to follow up on Sam's remark first. The proposals for this valuation are, if anything, worse than 2017, 2018. We've created a modeler. You can take a look at this modeler if you go to this address or just Google for USS pensions model. And you can see that under the current scheme, a lecturer on 35K might expect an income of about 20 grand in retirement. Their total benefits would be worth about £800,000. So that gives you a bit of context about how much it's worth go to the modeler, put in your income, put in your date of birth, and you can find out the implication for you. The most pessimistic projections from the USS suggest that we can expect a income of just under £5,000 in retirement, and this would be worth a mere £170,000. So the cuts here are very, very large. So what's at the root of this? Sam has beautifully articulated.
Neil, my apologies. Could you put your presentation on slideshow mode, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Let me. Is that better? We good?
Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So Sam's beautifully articulated what the technical aspects of the valuation, but underlying this is a more serious, and perhaps the underlying cause of this is a governance crisis. Members and employers do not have any way within the scheme rules to hold the trustee accountable for their decision. So here we see another graph, and this plots member satisfaction over recent years, which has plummeted to 24%. One of the actions that the trustee has done in response to this is to cut their target for member satisfaction from 70% to 30%. I'm not sure that's going to help very much. And it's important to note that the governance and oversight of USS is weaker than other similar schemes. So if you look at the Railways Pension Scheme, or if you look at the University of London Pension Scheme, members and employers have much more role over how directors are appointed and how those decisions are made. Now, we have members on the JNC. We can propose changes to the scheme rules. That's part of the governance structure. This is one of the things that we could do. There are limits to how easy it will be to do that, but this is a strategy that we could use and would enable us to have a sustainable solution to this. I've written a bit more about this in a blog, so do take a look. Now, this kind of leads on to the other aspect of our strategy that needs to be, is incredibly important, and that's UCU's legal strategy. Now, many of you will know that Academics for Pension Justice commissioned one of the UK's leading GCs to have produce an opinion about the 2017 valuation. He said there was good grounds to take the trustee to court for breach of trust. This is gold dust. QCs do not give opinions like that unless there is something very, very wrong with the scheme. Now, this is only one element of our legal strategy. We need to have a broader legal strategy that includes appointing top pension QCs and top pension litigators. Now, none of this will be cheap, but look, the stakes here are enormous. This is an £80 billion scheme. The stakes for individual members are hundreds of thousands of pounds. The amount that we would end up spending on legal fees is nothing in comparison to the potential benefits. It is absolutely critical that we have the very best legal strategy and legal representation to help our JNC negotiators as part of this. Now, this doesn't take away from any of the other aspects of our strategy and our, the things that we can do. This doesn't diminish industrial action, quite the opposite. This supports it and complements it, but it's really important that we have that. And I think it's really important that UCU members can be confident of the caliber of legal support that our negotiators are getting as part of this. I think 22 seconds early, so I'll stop there.
Thanks very much. And if you might want to stop the screen share, so then we can get back to the main screen. Thanks, Neil. I think it's very interesting as a pensions negotiator to recognise how complex the scheme is and how difficult it is for members' rights to be respected in an appropriate way. And of course, we have a lot of democratic deliberation that allows that. But it is also important that we get advice when needed. Our next speaker is someone who's spent a lot of time thinking about the scheme. And I know Marion and I have had many, many chats as negotiators. Marion is currently on USS's superannuation working group as a member of the advisory group. They have had significant input into how the scheme has become more equitable for members, and have actually been at the forefront of putting in motions and agreeing positions that take us forward in terms of protecting members' interests. And I'm very proud to hand over the podium to Marion Hersh. Marion, are you happy to take over?
Yes, first can I check that I'm unmuted and also on slides up?
Your slides are up and you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll also say I'm also an alternate negotiator. Okay, I'm going to 2 slides, 2 topics. First, a very brief overview of current benefits, then employer proposals. And just an overview, there were changes due to the 2011 valuation, and then in 2016, due to the 2014 valuation, which shows how the valuations are used to attack our pensions. And I'm not going to go into the details of this, but I think one of the points that came out of these changes is the fact that not just are 2-tier schemes wrong in principle, but they're also very bad practice because the second tier is then introduced later. So current benefits, we have the better scheme defined benefits up to 60,000 salary and defined contributions below that, accrual rate of 1/75th, which means for each year, whatever you earn, you get the 75th of that. Inflation indexation, it goes up 1% for every percent inflation up to 5%, and then 0.5% from there to 10%, and there's a cap at 10%, which is already a problem. There's a lump sum of 3 times the DB pension, and there are various problems with DC in terms of there being no set rate, so much more insecure, uncertain as it depends on the market, generally less, and in the scheme version we've got, they're lower in per contributions. They're also individual pension pots. So there isn't the collective element which gives security and also sort of smooths out the investments. So can we move to the second slide of the employer proposal? And the employers don't like the contribution increases. They could have joined us to fight them, and that would have been the good solution. You know, there's always strength in numbers, and okay, employers are employers, not activists, but we could still work together to overthrow them. But instead of that, they're making proposals to slash benefits. And what I'm looking at here is the proposals for everyone rather than the second tier. So the first thing is reducing the defined benefits threshold to 40,000. That will mean a lot more members have some DC. And even more important, it's a sort of step on the way to bringing back 100% DC, which we threw out the industrial action in 2018. And as I've said, DC is just a lot worse. There's proposal to reduce the accrual rate to 1/85th. So we get an 85th salary rather than the 75th, and this would reduce pensions by 12%. There's another proposal of 30,000 salary in the 75th accrual. The threshold reduction would presumably also reduce the lump sum. And there's another particularly nasty proposal to cap inflation proofing at 2.5%. Inflation is currently low, but it's been high in the past. And for instance, if it's 5%, which isn't particularly high for 4 years, it would reduce benefits by 10%. If it's 10% for 4 years, it would reduce benefits by a quarter. And if it's 15% for 4 years, it would reduce them by 37% and over 8 years by 60%. So basically, if there's high inflation for an extended period, we'd really end up without pensions. And most of these changes are going to particularly affect the lower paid, particularly casualised members. And, you know, sort of just foreseeing the next section, we're going to need a wide range of actions to overthrow this, to defend our pensions, including legal action.
Marion, I'm sorry to interrupt.
By last phrase, but also including industrial action.
Thanks, Marion. Thanks very much. That was very helpful to give us a sense of how the pension could be eroded. I will now start to take questions from the floor or comments. So if you could please use the raise hand function. For some of you, it is within the participants tab. For others, it is within the reactions tab on Zoom on your